So let me know when we are live on YouTube and I will call the meeting to order.
It is queuing up right now. It's almost there. I have to prove I'm not a robot.
Problem.
I have my suspicions about you, Kelly. You're too
Yeah.
perfect.
I'll set April.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Scarborough Board of Education meeting. Today is March 10th, 2021. May I have the attendance, please?
Sure. Mrs. Giftis?
Yes.
Dr. Gill?
Yes.
Ms. Casalonis?
Here.
Ms. Layton?
Here.
Mrs. Lindstrom?
Here.
Mrs. Seither?
Here.
And Mrs. Turner?
Here. Excellent. If everyone could please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to Sandy. Thank you.
Thank you, April. So we're in session 2, budget presentations. And we will start things off with our wonderful Special Services Department. And Allison, I'll turn it over to you.
I'm jumping right in, huh? Good afternoon, everybody. Just to quickly touch on some things we heard the other day, I wanted to reinforce the support of the K-2 behavior positions and maintaining those in the budget, and I can give you lots of reasons why. Also strongly support the curriculum instruction for phonics, Tier 2 interventions, learning recovery, instructional coaches. All of these things help address students' needs at the lowest restrictive level, and that's always our goal. Special services, just a quick overview, our primary programs include special education, Section 504, gifted and talented, ESL, and within all of our programming, we impact 33% of our students. 33% of our students are accessing one or more of those services. So what resources are needed to maintain our current programming and services? We will need to reallocate personnel and some facility resources to adjust to our incoming student needs as well as our changing populations from phase to phase. We're really focused on being as efficient with our adult support models, but also creating a safe and positive learning environment for our students. The second resource we need is one I didn't expect to be asking for. In January of this year, the DOE extended IDEA or special education eligibility for students until their 22nd birthday. Currently, students can access services through the school year of their 20th year if they haven't received a diploma. So this requirement went into effect immediately. As you can imagine, it has significant ripple effects throughout the state and in many departments. The DOE has put together a task force to look at such things as funding, the special education regulations, facilities, staffing and certification, name care payments, adult education, DHHS adult service eligibility, vocational programming, the list goes on and on. I've just attached, if you're interested, just some information about it, questions and answers that the DOE put out to. So that is very unexpected. It does have a small impact on us for next year. We have under 5 students that will be accessing services past their 20th year, and several of them require adult supports. As the years go on and in further budgets, this will impact us in many, many other ways. Next slide. What resources do we need to continue to ensure a safe and healthy school environment? Sue Ketch, our high school principal, already spoke to this about increasing a high school social work position from part-time to full-time with shared costs between special education and the high school. We have seen a significant increase in the number of students hospitalized for mental health reasons this year. We've seen a significant increase in high school students that were currently accessing a 504 plan, but accommodations in this kind of environment with the pandemic and remote instruction was not enough to meet their needs, and now have been referred into special education. And our school avoiders, whether remote or in person, has become more complex as well. Secondly, in addressing enrollment projections and learning recovery, we would like, again, to maintain the instructional supplies and staff to provide COVID recovery services. This would be for students in person or remote. It could be during the school day, after school, or in the summer. We have found for a lot of students this year, they just are spent at the end of the day. They have no fuel left in their tank to do additional tutoring or instruction. So we're looking at more creative ways of doing it, which will include different opportunities this summer. So the impact on the budget for the services we need would be only in maintaining what's already in the budget, that COVID recovery position. And I think I have one last slide. Are there any resources that have been deferred or removed that potentially will have significant impact on students? I have been bringing this up for the last several years about DOE potentially having the school districts responsible for students beginning at age 3 in special education, the age 3 to 5-year-olds. Right now, there is a proposal before the legislature to have this be a 3-year roll-in, starting now and fully implemented by school year 24. This will have significant budget impact on facilities, on staffing, on creating preschool gen ed classrooms for inclusion, on transportation, on evaluations. So we, that is coming. Again, stay tuned. The first year for Scarborough, because we do not have any current preschool programs, will be a year to plan and bring the community together and look at what resources we do need in order to be at full implementation for 3 years. So more to come on that. And that's it for right now. Happy to, of course, answer any questions, but I know Kate has us on a good a good agenda.
Kate has us on a short leash. I'll just jump in right now before I go to the next slide and say that we'll use the same protocol that we used yesterday. We'll have a couple of presenters and then we'll have time for questions. So you'll want to be jotting down questions that you have. We do have the parking lot document that's attached. It's linked into the agenda and we've got a few things on there from yesterday. So if you have big ideas or wonders, or even small ones that we can address quickly, you can park them in there. And now I think we'll see how Monique is feeling about talking with us.
Always interested in talking. I'll focus this on the budget conversation though. In terms of resources needed included within this budget, our online applications that support our students' learning. We have about a dozen instructional applications that are managed through curriculum, as well as a number of different applications across all the schools as well. We're also looking to fully funding. We've always fully funded the PSAT for sophomores and juniors, and in light of the state's shift, most recently to having the NWEA become the new MEA state test starting this spring. Our high school juniors will be asked to take the NWEA, but given our experience this year, we know that the community really wants our students to continue to take the SAT. So I've reallocated resources in order to make accommodations for that. You've heard from the buildings around 8th grade and high school math, new resources. This past year was a bit of a bridge year because the 8th grade, the middle school students who use the high school resources, because we have that vertically aligned curriculum, we had to purchase used textbooks because they only leveraged the online application, and as a result of Flash, that was no longer available. So they've been making do this year, as well as the high school with no online resources coordinated to their text materials. So working with the high school and with the middle school teachers, we put a placeholder in the budget to cover the cost of materials and professional development there. And we're going to go through a process of screening and developing criteria and then reviewing resources for a purchase pending a successful budget, but we've allocated resources towards that end. Professional development, specifically in the area of social emotional learning, that would take on the form of professional development funds, whether that be bring an expert in or whether that be having teachers participate in professional workshops. I've also included funding for summer for some professional development in these areas, and you heard the K2 talk of responsive classroom. 3-5 is still working on what their guaranteed and viable solution will be. We're also working with the K-12 SEL committee. We have a meeting next week, I believe on March 18th, to continue to coordinate our efforts to make sure that those strategies are in place for our students, ever more important this year. We also have our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which is connected to our social emotional learning work as well. And that will take additional funds. I typically allocate our federal grants towards this endeavor. That's what we've been doing for both SEL and the DEI work. There is some funding in professional development for some of that work, certainly not all of it. And then we've allocated, had start having conversations about what kinder camp might look like this summer, about what some sort of summer reading and math summer camp might look like for students. So I've allocated funding for that to fund staff, but also to provide resources. And so taking a look at some of the deferred pieces, as folks who've been on the board for some time know that we have made incremental steps forward. But for example, we had a 3-year literacy implementation initiative. We're on year 6, finalizing year 6 of that. So we've slowed down our implementations. This has moved everything back. So where we thought year 4, we would be doing science, tackling science and social studies, that's had to be put on hold. The challenge with that is our stuff is getting older. Microscopes are breaking down. Kits are coming apart. There also is a need to bring teachers together, K-12, and particularly at K-5, across both content areas. So time is the real challenge. This year, we have not been able to bring any teachers together K-12. The Wednesday afternoon time has been consumed with prep time and grade level meeting time in order to best prepare for students in terms of lessons and instruction. So the professional development we have had to provide has come in more or less one and done, as well as the opportunities that our coaches have had in working with teachers. So time is a significant challenge for collaborative curriculum work, particularly in bringing teachers together across phase levels. So, and that has an impact, that has as much of an impact on addressing science and social studies, as well as SEL, diversity, equity, inclusion, as materials. Professional development is also an area. While we have, I've reallocated budgets to put more professional development back into the budget, we are going to continue to put a pause. We're going to defer participation in national conferences. Certainly, if there are virtual opportunities that are within the budget, we'll certainly attend to those. But there are some national conferences being advertised now where teachers can travel to those conferences, but that's just outside our scope. We have much to do within the time we have available. The calendar time for professional development is my biggest worry, quite frankly. Our teachers do and continue to strive to want to do a really great job for their students. Many of them are involved in professional development on their own time, and they maximize the time that we have. And I know that this was a conversation in and around the calendar piece, but we have 2 strategic target areas. One is effective teaching and learning, and we have PLT time, but we also have to allocate time next year for teachers to come together and time to learn and plan for students who are involved, have unfinished learning and have challenges. We also need time to review and adjust the curriculum for vertical articulation. I was not able to get any groups together. So we need to continue to keep those improvements moving. But then we also have safe and inclusive schools as another target area. And that's where the social emotional learning piece is. And we will need to allocate targeted time towards equity, diversity, and inclusion, and time for teachers to come together to collaborate. Even the notion of doing a curriculum audit or equity audit ought to involve all staff. I'm not sure where that time is going to come to have the quality of the conversations that need to have in order for us to move forward. So for within education, what we've found is that effective professional development is defined as a professional development that has a positive impact on students. It has to be content focused, those evidence-based practices. It has to incorporate adult learning theory. It needs to support collaboration in a job embedded context. Teachers can't learn a new practice without practicing it. It also involves modeling of the effective practice. It provides coaching and expert support. That's bringing in the consultants that we've brought in over the past. And it's also opportunities for feedback and reflection and is sustained duration. So that is my biggest worry in terms of this organization moving forward and continuing to be a learning organization. Our community has high expectations, as well it should, but that is a significant resource that falls short. I'm not sure how much we'll be able to accomplish without the time piece. In terms of the libraries, there was much conversation yesterday around libraries. To provide you with a little bit of context, while the circulation rate from Wentworth was very impressive, Please know that pre-COVID, just to give you some context, pre-COVID, it was about 12 to 15,000 per year. The middle school this year ran into some challenges with staff either being reallocated to cover classrooms or out on medical leave. So their programming fell short of what we used to provide in the past. Also, when Kelly Muller-Martin talked about the K-5 librarian, they have had a shared librarian. She's absolutely right. They've had a shared librarian for quite some time, but only in the past 3 years. We did add a librarian at the middle school. So really, it's been 3 years that there's been a full-time position at middle school. Prior to that, we had a K-8 librarian. And so we've made incremental steps forward in that area. And in these areas where there are resources or deficiencies, our leadership council has worked hard to say, okay, what are the competing priorities this year? How do we set up our students for success next year? Do we ask for an additional librarian, or do we wait and we put our resources towards reducing teacher class size? And so in working with schools, principals, yes, the librarian position is on the list, but not for this year. And so the principals and I continue to have conversations how to maximize our staffing resources within our libraries. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. I think Instructional Technology is up next. We can bring Dawn on board.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. For instructional technology this year, it's been a busy year. Obviously, resources that we would need are outlined in the budget. There's no new resources other than the potential for 2 high school STEM labs, which is the bottom section. We've been very fortunate through the funding that was provided through the federal COVID related funds. Going forward, we need to be able to maintain the commitment to our current programs and services. So funding is required in the areas that will support the significant growth in IT systems, devices, and services. To put that in context, we've had a growth of almost 200% in the number of devices that are used by teachers and students every day, which is unprecedented growth for any organization. If you think about it at work, that would be the equivalent of giving everyone 3 pieces of technology overnight. So while we were fortunate to do that, a couple of the bullets there, software subscriptions needed to be adjusted and increased as far as not only volume, but access. We also experienced some uptick in cost for maintenance and support contracts for online services. Obviously, software companies picked up pretty quick on the fact that their services were now at a premium. We did have to make some COVID related and cybersecurity related improvements for software and hardware related services. We were in our line item detail, we have tracked all of those, so that would be available if you would like to see that. And we've outlined a new section in the budget to be able to repair, maintain, and support all of this technology going forward, which is a higher cost, obviously, than it has been in the past, where we were supporting essentially just the one-to-one computer devices, middle school and high school. and the rest of the devices were in carts that were maintained at the school site. Now we have devices going home every day. The second group of resources is that we've been providing home-based Verizon hotspots for both students and staff to support remote teaching and learning. I would say that while this, relatively speaking, while this program has been small, it's been highly successful in this, from the standpoint of we do have families and staff who, without this program, would be unable to have sustainable high-speed internet available to each member of the family during the day. I don't know if any of you have experienced this yourself, but when you get more than one family member on the internet at the same time, and then someone decides to go stream Netflix at that very same time, your internet poops out on you. So this program has proven successful. It was initiated by the Maine Department of Education after we had already gone into this ourselves. So we had some number of hotspots that we had purchased up front and contracted for services through Verizon. Then the state came along and did the same thing. So we've almost doubled the number of hotspots. As of the end of June, the state will stop paying for their part of their number of hotspots. We continue on a monthly basis to review who has hotspots, and we continue to also slowly trickle hotspots out as families realize that they're having difficulties with multiple family members. So it's kind of a moving target how many we have out from week to week. The other part is that we continue to focus on a technology refresh for K-12 staff desktops, which is the one area of our technology that we have not refreshed in the last 5+ years. And that's for school staff that are in the front offices, the desktop computers that you see when you walk in the front office primarily. Those devices are actually getting beyond their life cycle. They're becoming more and more difficult to get parts for, as well as to keep running effectively. So our proposal was to replace those devices this summer before they get beyond our ability to maintain them efficiently and start to become a drag on our ability to keep up with the problems that we may have. And then again, the last bullet, addressing enrollment projections, SEL needs and learning recovery. Our one focus there is whether or not we move forward with supporting the build out of 2 high school STEM labs. I have to be very thankful to both the school leadership, central office leadership, and the board, as well as our community, for the fact that in the area of instructional technology, we've been very, very fortunate and continue to be able to have the technology that our students need and our teachers need in the hands of everyone, so that we have very effective teaching and learning utilizing modern resources. So at this point, we don't have any resources that are deferred or removed from our budget that would have an impact if they weren't funded. I will say finally, though, that we were extremely fortunate that the COVID-related funds came along. There was a significant amount of funding that was going to need to be requested in fiscal year 22 to refresh just what we had already in-house. We were not only able to do that a year early to be able to get more technology in the hands of kids, but also we were able to add some enhancements that we would have never been able to consider if the funding didn't exist from another level.
Thank you, Don. I would just make a couple of points for those who might be watching and might not be fully oriented to our materials, but in the budget book, in the executive summary, there's a pretty significant section of 3 pages that talks about the CRF funding, which is the coronavirus relief funds, a couple of grants that came down from the federal government in this past year, and how those were spent across the district. And as Don says, a significant portion of that funding was available to us for technology. And it's really been a game changer for us in terms of how we provide teaching to our students. And so many of the things that we've been, I guess you'd say, forced to do in the pandemic environment and the remote learning environment are also things that have opened doors for us and will be things we'll take into the future of teaching for our students. The one other thing I would say at this point is that we do have a capital budget slide coming up later on, and that includes technology and facilities and transportation. So we might have a question for Don down the line on that. But at this point, I think we get to open this up for questions about what we've just been listening to.
I have a question for Monique. Monique, can you please speak to the difference between PLT and PD and what the different budget allocations would be, or what the impact of the budget PLT has?
PLT's acronym stands for Professional Learning Teams. That is how we use some of, well, pre-COVID, how we used the early release days that we had, the once a month days. We had a group of teachers come together over the summer to redesign that structure. The idea around that structure was that teachers would identify goals aligned with their evaluation goals, and they would work collaboratively with teachers who have similar goals, doing research, gathering information, trying new methods, and practicing that in their classroom, and then coming back together again to continue working on improving the lesson. We had many groups working on writing, we had groups working on mindfulness, we had groups working on alternative furniture in classrooms, all sorts of innovative ideas. So that does not have a budget implication in terms of materials. It's minimal. I had some lines in my budget. Some teachers wrote grants for things. We have that in some of our, covered in some of our supply budgets. That PD is called to refer to professional development. We really should be calling it professional learning. And it takes on several forms that have budget impact. One is it's a conference registration. Another is it's a consultant we bring in to work with teachers. Another is it's a group who wants to do a book study, so it may be some supplies. But teachers still need the time embedded in their work, in their contract year and work day to do that professional learning if it's to be effective and has a positive impact on students and their learning. Years ago, I did a presentation where the then board felt that teachers were certified, so they learned what they needed to know and they were done. So why do we even need professional learning? And as this pandemic illustrated, we always need to keep growing in this profession, learning more about students, learning more about new practices, more effective practices, learning about our implicit biases and what we might be doing in our classrooms unintentionally. doing curriculum audits, all of those sorts of things which are on our list of improvements. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. Thank you for making that distinction for us.
We use too many acronyms.
It's a,
Patient.
it's a lot. And, you know, I mean, I don't mean to say, you know, to imply that I was playing, you know, the part there. I know what the acronyms are. I wasn't sure if we had talked about what PLT specifically was. And so I wanted to make sure that that was clear for everybody who might be listening too.
I appreciate the opportunity to provide that clarification.
Monique.
I see Sarah's hand is up, I believe.
Yep. Can you hear me? My connection seems to be going in and out.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. My question is for Allison. Allison, you mentioned the phasing in of the 3 to 5-year-old, and you alluded to the fact that it's going to be a significant impact on the budget, which is not surprising. I'm just wondering if you have any estimation, kind of two questions, if you have any estimation on how significant that impact will be. And similar to the question that I posed yesterday to Mike Legage in terms of the turf field, like, are there things that we can be doing early and kind of phased so that we're being a little bit planning for it rather than just getting, you know, having it hit our budget all at once in 1 year?
Sure. A few years back, we had a group that came together to look at developing preschool programs at our 3 K-2 schools, and that it was cost prohibitive and space prohibitive for us to move forward with that. But for me, that would be a significant step forward for us to be looking at how and where we can develop some preschool classrooms, because that would start benefiting all students at this point, not just special education students. So we need places for, once these students are identified, that they are with their peers. So if we don't develop contracts with local daycare providers, preschool programs, then we will have to create them for ourselves. So we know that's a facilities issue. That's a teacher issue. Just starting with that would be significant for us before the special education staffing mandate came in. We are looking, Scarborough collaborates with several other districts on other initiatives in special education. You know, we've talked, do we have a central testing site for evaluations, things like that. So because of the lack of information or decisions made at the state level, so much is up in the air. But I will say, Sarah, preschool programming would be a more realistic initial first step for us to do sooner than later.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And I think also it's timely to remind ourselves that this initiative is out there when we're talking about forward planning for K2, and you know what we might potentially be doing in terms of space there. We have to bear in mind that it might not just be our existing school population, but it might be an add of younger children as well, or it might make sense to consider that. I see Leanne's hand is up.
It is. And I'm not sure if this question is for Dawn, Todd, or Sue, but can you explain more about the 2 STEM labs? We had heard yesterday about a lab. I'm wondering what the difference is between the 2 setups.
As far as the configuration and the need rationale, I defer to Sue on that. I know that both Todd and I did an evaluation last year as part of the budget process to ascertain the cost required to convert two rooms to STEM and or robotics classrooms, and determined what that cost would be. Regardless of the function of the rooms, the costs were very comparable. So it really comes down to what the educational function of the room and how what the rationale for expanding the number of classrooms within the high school would be, which is Sue's expertise.
I'll say that the conversations that I've been having on the topic with Sue and Todd have been about trying to figure out what's the right scope of work to move forward, and what would be the most cost-effective thing that we could do that would make those spaces actually viable for STEM teaching. I believe that the original plan right now was to have one room specifically built for STEM and the other to be more of a classroom space, which could be used for, engineering projects, but not like big space consuming projects, but more of a classroom space that could be used for math and I guess classroom teaching. I think Todd is probably out here in our audience someplace, and he might be able to weigh in on it. We have asked, and I think Sue mentioned this yesterday, we have asked Harriman to work with us on a plan that will do enough to get us to a useful classroom space for the STEM teacher without it being as much of a cost, perhaps, as outfitting it 100%. But Don's right that his piece of it would be the infrastructure piece to allow for Wi-Fi projectors, the kinds of equipment that are included in every classroom. And I see Todd.
Yeah, and the cost for us is roughly $8,000 a room to put the wiring in, put the projector, put the wireless support for laptops, regardless of how many students and what the function is.
And I'm pretty sure, Don, we put that in the operating budget because it was a small piece.
Yes.
And so that's included in the equipment line in IT operating.
That's correct.
I did promote Todd to speak, so he is available.
Hi there.
Available, but he's mysteriously invisible.
I am working on a new, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm working on a different laptop and I cannot figure out how to make the camera come on. But anyway, I'm here. So to answer the question about the STEM labs, it's really just one lab space. And Kate is right. It's a secondary classroom that could be used for anything. It would just be a basic classroom, might be used for overflow from STEM, but might be also used for math or another science. Again, deferring to Sue. But if you look at the space we are considering for this, which is actually a facilities storage garage, it's sort of naturally divided almost in half. And so with Harriman's work last year, we basically decided that to use the natural division in the space and make it two spaces, using the larger portion for the STEM space and the smaller one for the regular classroom. Both of them would be over 800 square feet and would have access to a hall, but the STEM section would have the existing overhead door. So if they had larger projects they needed to move in and out, they wouldn't have to try and squeeze it through the hallway. And so that's why they kind of selected that space. And I hope that answers the question. It's really just one STEM lab. The other one is just a basic classroom.
Thank you.
Do I see any other hands raised? Any other questions for our current speakers? If you find that you have a question as we move forward and we're moving past your thought process, I would just jot it right in that parking lot document, and we'll make sure that we circle back to it. So our next section is going to be transportation, facilities and maintenance, and capital projects and equipment. And I think Diane is going to help me talk about transportation. Maybe, whoops, it would help if I didn't screw up the slides. Here we go. So in these support departments that aren't fully instructional, we've kind of compressed the 2 slide questions. In some cases, there's not quite as much to say about the details of what's going on. For transportation, the budget proposal that the Leadership Council has created includes maintaining funding for a full staff of bus drivers. And what that means is 23 bus drivers. Last year's budget, or the budget season, we talked a lot about taking out and then adding back bus drivers as a response to the pandemic environment and as a response to the need to distance students on a bus so that we can't have as many riders as we normally would. To be frank, the only way that we're pulling off school in person at all this year is because parents have agreed to drive their children to and from school. And we are so grateful for that. It's really the way that we've managed to transport the students that do need a bus ride without excluding anyone. So hiring bus drivers is a story that you've heard us tell. It's a sad saga. There really haven't been a lot of bus drivers looking for work in recent years pre-COVID, and now with the pandemic environment, it's even more difficult to find new hires and to invite folks to come to work with us. So at the moment, I believe we have, oh, I can't do math. I think we have 18 bus drivers right now. 5 open positions. And so we toyed with the idea of, well, if we're getting along with what we have, should we continue to fund, because this is what we would call level services. It's what's in the budget with FY21, or should we continue to fund at that level? And the answer is sure, because if all the kids need to ride again and we go back to school in person, then that's what we will really need. And leaving aside the potential challenge of hiring, we want to have the resources available to hire those drivers if we can. So that's one of the things that's been retained in our FY22 proposal. And then in terms of what was deferred or has been added back, we have the bus replacement cycle. Last year in FY21, our original capital proposal was for 3 replacement buses, which is our usual cycle. Generally speaking, we have 30 buses. They have a 10-year lifespan. So 3 buses a year is our reasonable replacement cycle. Last year, we took one of those buses out and we only replaced 2. This year in CIP, you'll see that we're asking to go back to the 3 buses per year. The good news in CIP for transportation is that we were able to purchase vans. We did have, in FY21, we took out the request to replace a minivan and just deferred that. And as it so happened, when the CRF funds came along, the coronavirus relief funds came along, one of the things that we could spend that on was vehicles. And so we have purchased 5 new to us, slightly used minivans, and our fleet is now in really great shape. We were able to decommission the one that was dying that we wanted to replace in FY21, and the others are on the road and helping us immensely with the flexibility of our ability to transport kids.
And that was really necessary this year because of the limitations that we had. So, you know, we might have in previous years had 2 or 3 students on a van with a driver and an aide, and we're not able to do that with the current restrictions. So the ability to get those were just in time.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, when folks are looking at the description of the CRF funds, I know everybody out there is just running to read this compelling document. But the things that the federal government thought were important for us were things that would help us open school and keep it open in this environment. And you know, lots of different schools across the country grabbed onto that transportation piece and expended some of those funds in that area because it is such a significant impact. If you can't get the children to school or get them to their programming, you're really failing them. Diane, did you want to throw anything else in there? Diane got kicked out by her computer, so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I disappeared there for a couple of minutes.
I just figured I'd just keep talking until I'm like the piano player.
Okay, of all timing, like that was not a good time for that to happen. No, so, you know, again, I can't say enough about the work that our transportation department has done this year. And also the commitment that our parents have made, because as all of you know, I think when we started this year, we were upwards of, I think, 65% of our parents who were providing transportation for their own children. And, you know, I think that has, remained pretty true for the year, because as you know, we're still under the restrictions of no more than 1 student per seat. So at the largest bus we have, I believe that's right around 28 students at 1 per seat. So, that's been no small challenge. And with the number of adults that have gone in and out of quarantine at different points in the year, the fact that we've been able to keep this fleet going and not cancel school because of transportation, as some of our district partners have had to do, is really a testament to Sarah, our transportation director, who continuously is looking at bus runs, rewriting bus runs, moving kids around as needed, making accommodations as parents' situations have changed and they've needed some support. Our transportation folks have transported cohort D students at all times of day, any day of the week. They have delivered meals, delivered work when they've needed to. It's just been endless. So we're so appreciative of everyone in this organization, because I think we wouldn't be doing what we're doing right now if we really didn't have all hands on deck. But we do want those 5 drivers next year, because we are anticipating that we will be able to extend transportation to our students. And obviously, if we could find those 5 bus drivers, that's 5 more buses that we could be putting on the road right now. So if you know anyone who would like,
if anyone's listening, we have a CDL training program that's quite excellent. If you'd like to learn how to be a bus driver, can't think of a more fun way to spend your day.
Right. You don't need to come ready, trained with a CDL license. We will invest our time, energy, and expertise into training folks who have that interest.
So, commercial break. This program is brought to you by the Scarborough School Department, Transportation Department. And we also need a commercial for facilities and maintenance, because as Todd will tell you, he's down a few really important positions. But His team is just remarkable and is taking really good care of us. Todd, you out there?
Hang on, let me bring him back.
Did he get booted out with you?
He was just back in the audience for a minute, so now he's with us.
There we go. Here I am. I found the camera and the volume. New laptop, so excuse my elementary usage here.
Never giving you a new laptop again.
Yeah. My old one was only 7 or 8 years old. I think I did okay with it. So thank you, Kate, for that fine and I think overly done introduction. But I am pretty proud of our pretty lean staff, and COVID has not done us any favors, but we've also been able to accomplish a lot because of COVID at the same time. I would probably say that safety has been at the forefront of our efforts this year more than ever before. And again, we are looking to try and maintain our funding for a full-time staff if, like the bus department, we could find suitable applicants without robbing one department to complete another. So we are currently a full-time maintenance worker down and several custodians, probably 2 or 3 part-timers and at least 1 full-time custodian down. The hybrid model has helped us because the schools aren't as fully occupied and therefore fully dirtied, shall we say. And the school lunch plan, even though it's been spread out, has been much neater because a lot of the food is sort of prepackaged and prepared in a different way. So that helps cleaning up afterwards. But again, we try to keep everything safe and disinfected as much as we can. We've taken on the role of Amazon warehouse for receiving products and goods for the district, everything from furnishings, clear plastic dividers and other things, all the way down to desks and personal protective equipment or
Okay.
PPE. There. Hello. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing voices. So with respect to, are there any resources deferred or removed from our budget, which again will have a significant impact on our students? Really, I think the most important process in any facilities operation is to keep your eye on prevention of catastrophic losses. So we spend a lot of money on contracted services to keep our electrical and HVAC and plumbing systems running. They're heavily used systems that keep everybody comfortable, and we have hundreds and hundreds of toilets and sinks and so forth. So there's a lot to keep everything moving and operational. This year, we've even conducted district-wide indoor air quality tests, which really show that our systems have been maintained and are providing the appropriate air quality for all occupants, teachers, staff, students, and we're pretty pleased with that. We're also blessed with the CRF funds in that typically in a capital budget, I will ask for equipment and so forth and buy bits and pieces of things that we need, always feeling like we're just kind of, maintaining what we have and replacing the ancient stuff. This year, because of CRF funds, we were able to leverage some of that to improve our overall cleaning fleet of equipment and our maintenance equipment. We had asked last year, I don't know if it's time to talk about CIP yet or not, Kate, but we had asked last year, for example, for a new dump truck, which is just a small 1-ton truck, but it has a very important piece of equipment in the back in the winter, and it's a salter sander. The truck, typically we like to replace things at 10 years old. The truck is now 15 years old, has low mileage, but it's unfortunately rusting out. And the Public Works Department's been great in maintaining that truck. They welded a new floor in it so the driver wouldn't fall through it. And our sander died in the middle of the winter this year. So we were able to reallocate some CIP dollars that I had earmarked for cleaning equipment to buy a new sander for the old dump truck, which we'll just put in the new dump truck should we be so fortunate to get a new one next year. But it's a infrequently used piece of equipment, but it's vitally important when you have an icy day and teachers and students are walking in the building. So that's just an example of one of the blessings of COVID. But again, it's probably been more negative than positive in terms of overall impacts for us. Next, is there another slide for me, Kate, or is that it?
Nope, that's pretty much it. We'll go into capital next. And I did want to tell folks that we have a more detailed chart of all of our capital budget projects linked into the agenda. It's at the top. Looking to see what it's called here. Probably something clever like school capital budget detail worksheet. And that has a little bit more narrative to what it is that we're doing and why. And I think the important thing to remember, and the reason that it's on this slide, is that we did really cut back heavily on our facilities maintenance capital budget in FY21. We pretty much removed everything that we could reasonably defer. And so one of the goals of the town council and therefore also one of our goals has been to try to bring those things back and take another look at them and make sure that we're not losing ground. So this slide is really talking about the preventive maintenance cycle, is really talking about those capital projects. Drop this down.
And Kate, if I could just add one quick thing, the point about preventive maintenance, I mentioned, we're trying to head off catastrophic failures because those typically will result in loss of school time. So if we have boilers fail, for example, and there's no heat, you simply can't have school in the building, which is why we spend what we spend on our preventive maintenance program, because stuff only breaks when you need it. It doesn't break when you don't need it, it seems.
Right, and if you do the preventive maintenance and you keep things safe and well maintained, then you can get longer life out of your, let's say, HVAC system at the middle school, which should technically have died about 5 years ago. It's still chugging along. It's having its issues, but you know, the preventive maintenance lets us get ahead of those kinds of problems and extend the life of our systems. So capital projects, I just wanted to mention the capital budget. I've mentioned that we have a separate document for that. This is a separate section at the back of the budget book with some narrative pieces that are pretty captivating because Todd's a good writer, about how the projects are planned and you know what the useful life of things is and what these investments are about. The capital budget is a separate fund from the operating budget. It is not included in the budget referendum that goes to a vote for the community of Scarborough. It's a separate section that's combined with the town's capital budget and is passed by the town council. So it's a little bit separate process. It's also not a budget in which we know what tax dollars we're asking for, because each individual project is reviewed by the town finance department and they decide whether a project can be bonded or it should be paid for with reserve funds. We've used that quite a bit in the past couple of years, whether it's lease or whether it's appropriated, which means that it will be tax dollars requested and that will impact the bottom line on what we ask the taxpayers for. So that's something that we don't really have a say in, but it's something that will be talked about as we go forward and continue to discuss our budget proposal with the town. So in Dawn's technology capital budget, I believe the only item that we have in there right now is a replacement of projectors at K2. And Don, if you want to just say a word or two about that.
projectors in K2 are 8 years old or older. They're beginning to fail at a pretty systemic rate of several a week, and some of them we've been able to repair, and others not. And so its life cycle on a projector is usually 7 to 10 years, and we've seen extremely heavy use from day one on those. So we're proposing to replace them. Cost is about $165,000 for those. And that's for a total of 90.
So this is a much smaller ask for technology. Obviously, as Don was saying earlier, we've invested an enormous amount, and we've kind of been able to move forward on some of what we would normally put into a tech refresh by using the CRF funds this year. So that's a pretty small number. And you'll see if you go all the way to the bottom of that detail worksheet for capital budgets, there's a list of what our capital budgets approved have been in the past. I believe I've got 6 or 7 years worth of budgets in there. And this is a very low year for technology for obvious reasons. And then in facilities, it bumps up quite a bit because we're trying to restore some of the things that we did not do last year. And Todd, I don't know if you have that in front of you, but you could talk about what's in there.
Sure, I have a version of it up, and so some of the things that were deferred from last year, I mentioned the dump truck. We did get a significant portion of funding for HVAC upgrades, primarily for heating, ventilation, air conditioning for the middle school, because we've had an ongoing cycle of replacements for all the heat pumps. There are 123 heat pumps at the middle school serving all the various different individual spaces. Some of them are as large as half of your car, and some of them are about the size of a large microwave oven. So they're all over the place, above ceilings and in mechanical rooms and things like that. So we got going on some of those, and then COVID hit, and then we didn't want anyone in the buildings. So we kind of held off, and I did work on the outside of the buildings. For example, roofing projects, and we did some heat pumps for the middle school portables so that all 12 of them could be actually climate controlled in all seasons. So we did some of the work, but we didn't get to all of it. So now that we're a little bit more comfortable with getting people in the buildings, most of this HVAC stuff has to happen after hours or on weekends. So now that we're a little more comfortable with that, we can probably, I'm actually starting to develop the schedule for starting to get some of those replaced. The roofing projects Kate lists in the CIP budget. We did 2 large sections at the high school last year, and we held off on some that are listed here in this year's, but they're much smaller segments on the elementary schools and one on the middle school as well. We always try to plug away at painting, interior finishes, Kate calls it. It costs a lot of time and money to paint, and we don't have a big crew, so we typically contract that out because they can knock out a giant section in a short period of time, and they do a really professional job. So we worked away over, and that can only happen on vacation time, so we try to tackle that over school vacations if we can, or summer. Security and access management, that has been well funded as a result of unfortunate incidents at school where we just feel like we need more cameras and access control. So we always have, well, we have dozens and dozens of cameras and access points that are electronic and fail, again, typically when you need them the most. We also have flooring, and there's a reference to auditorium. The auditorium under normal years is very heavily used, and this year it wasn't as much because of group gatherings being not allowed, but we do have various types of flooring, tile, rubber flooring, carpeting that needs replacement as it ages. It gets worn out, and it's not good for indoor air quality, especially if it's carpeting. So we try to replace it as it needs it. building envelope. This is the most important one of the whole list because it includes, next to roofing, it includes the walls, windows, and doors. And we have listed here sections of these lovely brick buildings that everybody thinks are permanent. Believe it or not, they start to fall apart if you don't take care of them. The wind and the rain and the sun cook them and bake them and wash them out. So every year I do a segment of masonry repairs on the brick portions of buildings. Same with driveways and parking lots and playgrounds. Our playgrounds are in good shape around Wentworth, but are in tired shape at the K2 schools, and some attention really needs to be paid, especially to the ADA accessibility. We're working on that. We got some things in to help with access for wheelchair-bound students to get access to swings and so forth. We can put that in the spring. There's a big ticket item for the Quentin Drive roadway. For those of you who've ever traveled from Route 114 to the middle school, you will see that that road is deteriorating pretty badly, and that needs to be repaved. I've worked with Public Works to come up with an estimate, and that's the number they've helped with, and so that would go out to bid if it's approved. We would keep some sort of speed control in there. Right now there's a dip in there that most people hate, but if we didn't have it, people would be traveling way too fast, and I'd worry about safety of pedestrians. And then the science lab we've talked about, and facilities support equipment is the things I referenced, like floor equipment, dump trucks, just material moving things like a forklift and things like that. Our furnishings, there's a never-ending pile of furniture in our schools, and they have lasted a long time, but are in need, particularly at middle school and in some of the K2 schools. They're over 20 years old. You like to get 15 or 20 years out of them, and now we're over 20. And so we're replacing tables and desks and chairs as we get funding to do that. The rest, I guess, is Mike's. There's some athletic equipment there. He's referenced, and I'm not as well versed on that as he might be.
We did talk about that briefly yesterday. That's the fencing piece that that might be mandated by MPA. And I think, of course, there's the elephant and maybe 2 or 3 elephants in the room, which is the turf field and track replacement. I think this team has heard a lot about that, and we'll probably have a lot more conversations about that. But there is a placeholder right now in the CIP budget for that, as well as long range planning. And again, this team has had a lot of conversations about what's the right number, where should that live, and that'll be ongoing, but that's in the capital budget proposal at the moment.
I think I probably sound like a very repetitive broken record when I say this, but when I look at that number, knowing that that's where it was last year, I only believe that that will be a higher number because of what construction costs have done over the past year. They've increased. We're seeing, Sue and I are seeing that with Harriman as we talk about STEM Lab. We had a decent price last year. It's gone up, so we're scaling it back and simplifying it as much as we can to try and stay within that budget number. I would assume the same would be held true for the turf and track renovation. And in general, construction overall has gone up. The price of materials has gone up. The labor rates have gone up. Everything has increased in price, and it's one of the things that I talk about is if you get while the getting is good, because next year it's only going to be more money. So the longer you wait, the more it costs.
Thank you, Todd. Transportation we already talked about. So I think we'll go to wonderings and questions. And Sarah's already got her hand up because she wants to be first this time.
I don't need to be first.
I'm picking on you, Sarah.
I was just ready.
She is ready.
So in the conversations I've had with the chair of the town council, finance chair, so John Cloutier, he's talked about the process for them reviewing the budget and how the CIP is the last thing that they review. And so this has come up in conversations when we've talked about the long range planning funding, and the message that I'm getting is, you know, if you want something to guarantee something's funded, obviously putting in your operating budget, because we don't know how much taxpayer money we're going to have left to play with once it gets down to the CIP. So all of this to say, Todd, it would be useful, maybe not now, but at some point, to get some sort of prioritization of these items so that we can be sure that we're communicating to town council where our priorities are. Because if it comes down to cuts in what we're proposing, we want to make sure that, you know, you have your say in what's more important, which I know is a difficult ask and conversation to have, but I think it's unfortunately probably going to be the reality.
I can definitely do that.
I will say that on that detailed document, there is a priority column on the far right. Unfortunately, most of them say hi. So that's probably not as helpful as it might be. There's a few of them that are not high, but yeah, it's definitely a project that Todd and I sort of, first we triage to see what goes on there in the first place, but we could certainly triage to see what would get kicked off first if need be.
And I think a lot of the reason that list has become what it is that we've deferred things since I arrived in 2010. One year we deferred everything.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do anything because we had other huge amounts to undertake for one-to-one learning and so forth. So, but we can still, we can still prioritize and make things lower demand.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry to ask that. And I know that, one of the other things that we've advocated for is that, that our line should start sort of after the turf field. Like that shouldn't be kind of included in really our budget, so we don't want to lose things because that's included in our budget. But I think when they look at it, they do look at it in total and not as town and school separate. So.
Yeah, you're right, Sarah. I mean, if you take that placeholder for the turf field out, then you've got a budget in CIP that looks very similar to or less than what we've had in prior years.
Right. So, thank you. Don't kill the messenger.
Just for safety reasons, again, I hope the turf field doesn't count against us overall in the capital projects, but it absolutely needs to be done. It's a safety issue. And the longer it's just, again, like I said before, it's not going to get cheaper if we keep waiting and putting it off. So I think it's going to involve a large output of support from the community to get it done. And those whose student athletes play on that field and run on that track, they're the people that we need to be reaching out to and talking about how important it is for their students to stay safe while they're participating in activities they love.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the last thing we want to do is, number one, have anybody get hurt, and number two, have to shutter that facility because it's unsafe. So I think we all have agreed on that for sure. I don't see anybody else's hand raised here. Everybody is just so captivated and knows exactly what we're talking about. And maybe we need a break. I think the next thing is it says a 5-minute break. Let's see, where are we for time here? Oh, look, we're right on time. That's insane. Gosh, we're good. So everybody want to do 5 minutes? Is that sufficient? Okay, we'll see you back here at 5:56 computer time. Give everybody a sec to get back, April. I'm very strict.
I think everybody kind of grabbed a quick bite to eat, and so some people may have their cameras off just while they they finish up a few bites of
I'm
snack.
definitely chewing a little trail mix here, so. Snack time. It would be very unfortunate if we all keeled over. Just really mostly looking for Diane to see if she wants to help me talk about health services. I can't say enough about these guys. They're incredible. And as far as their budget is concerned, it's interesting because although we have retained the 2 school nurse positions that were added as COVID money in last year's budget, in the FY21 budget, their budget overall is actually decreasing by a smidge because we had budgeted more than what we actually needed for those new hires. And we were also able with health services to do some of the same things that Todd talked about in terms of purchasing equipment and fitting out the clinics and setting things up so that there's not going to be that initial big investment next year. We can just carry on with what we currently have.
Yeah, and one really neat investment that we were able to make, in addition to the really phenomenal work that we did in each of the buildings to create a well clinic and a sit clinic, to make sure that our nurses had all the PPE they needed and they were tested for N95 masks. But another really cool piece of equipment that we were able to purchase for each of the clinics were vision screening machines that are Wi-Fi capable. And so most of you remember when you had to do your vision screening, which by law we have to do in certain grade levels, you just, held your hand over your eye and you saw that chart somewhere. And in some cases, the nurse would have to really come close to students to be able to do that. And so in a COVID environment, obviously spacing is something that people have become acutely aware of. And so our nurses were able to locate a machine that does this work basically for them at this point in time. And it allows for safety because the nurse doesn't have to maintain close contact with the student. And so those were a great example of well-used CRF funding because those are not items that we would have been able to put into a typical budget. Had we budgeted for a vision screener machine, I would imagine in a typical year, we would be trucking that one machine from school to school and arranging a schedule by which they could share those. And again, the CRF funds made it available for us to make sure that each school had what they needed to do that.
Yeah, that was definitely a bonus. As far as health supplies and PPE are concerned, we're using our regular operating budget for that. We have had as Todd says, we've had an Amazon warehouse full this year. Some things have been pre-purchased with CRF funds for the coming year. And the state is also providing several different forms of PPE for us for free. They've got an arrangement with the federal government where they're receiving, I believe through FEMA, some equipment that they're just sharing right out with schools at no cost. So that's been pretty cool. And I will encourage folks to read the ever popular budget book, which describes a little bit about what folks have been doing in this environment. And that's true of these support departments as well.
And again, I think one other comment that I would make about the health services before we move on to adult education would be just to remind everyone about the very large number of hours that our nurses have been putting in during all of these COVID cases that we've had throughout the year, especially within the past couple of weeks. The health services team and myself and our building administrators who have been affected have been logging in lots of time outside of the school day, on weekends, in the evening. And again, we have been able to utilize some of our CRF funding to make sure that the nurses were being compensated for that time outside of their contract. You know, and certainly that is a small gesture that we can make to acknowledge that people are working well beyond the scope of a typical workday. So, you know, I was pleased that we were able to provide that at least for the nurses.
Absolutely. So we'll go to adult ed, and I don't think we have Marianne with us. Diane and I were going to try and do this quickly for her. So rather than have her come and have her 2 seconds to talk, really the big takeaways from adult ed are that, yes, we're still here. We've been keeping things going through the pandemic environment, a particular focus on trying to keep the workforce programs going and the ELL programs, programs for English language learners, because again, I mean, these are critical adult supports that are needed in this environment more so than ever, because those folks need to work and those folks need to be able to take care of their families. Not to mention the fact that I think the world could use a few more CNAs right now. So any of those health-related programs are just adding value all over the place. We did shrink funding for enrichment programs, and enrichment, when we use that expression to mean the fun programs that aren't necessarily leading to a degree or to a high school diploma or to a job. They're fun things to learn, like how to do Chinese cooking, or how to paint a beautiful picture or make jewelry or organize your cupboards. So enrichment programming, we cut back on our funding in FY21 because we figured, well, we probably weren't going to have people coming in and doing a painting studio at the high school, which we're not. And we really weren't sure what we would have access to for the community in terms of online and remote learning. So what's developed is there's actually a fairly small but robust catalog of enrichment programs that we're delivering online. And it's proven to be quite a nice escape for some of our folks, particularly seniors in the community who have been cooped up in their homes and haven't been able to get out and do some of the fun things they would normally do. So Marianne Doyle, who's our adult ed director, plans to actually continue to have that remote option on a number of our offerings. But we do want to build back up to, assuming that restrictions are lifted and we can get people back together, we do want to build back up on some of those enrichment programs. I think that's all we wanted to say about adult ed. And so we'll go to school nutrition. And Peter is listening in if anybody has specific questions for him. We thought we'd just do a little shout out again to the amazing job that this team has done. They've completely reinvented school lunch and breakfast, and a little bit the backpack program in much the same way that our teachers and education professionals have reinvented learning. So as soon as we shut down in March, the backpack program went into full gear and started working to make sure that our community was fed and that no one was going to go without a meal because they weren't in school. Diane mentioned earlier that bus drivers were delivering meals. The school lunch workers were coming in and cooking for us. They started making sort of the regular backpack style take home for the weekend meals. They graduated into making these vast pans of lasagna and sending home a week's worth of beautiful family style meals. Just remarkable. And then the USDA at some point decided that it would be allowing us to work under what they call the summer meal program or summer lunch program. And a couple things happened there. One is that all kids in Scarborough can now eat for free, regardless of their economic status. And it also allows us to claim or to receive reimbursement at a higher level for those meals. So the things that are in the FY22 budget that are a little bit different are maintaining funding for remote ordering software. One of the things that Peter Esposito, our school nutrition director, put in right at the start of school was touchless ordering. So no one has to pass cash back and forth because there's no cost. No one has to touch a terminal or get in the face of and order something from a school professional. They can do all the ordering online. Parents can do the ordering. And they've been delivering the meals out, as Todd mentioned, to all different corners of all of our schools to make sure that kids can be well fed and comfortable, but in sort of a to-go model. So that remote ordering software is going to stay in place, and it's a little bit more pricey than what we normally had or what we had pre-COVID. But we're going to keep that in place for this coming year to make sure that we're ensuring the safety of our kids as we transition back to whatever normal will look like. The maintaining the funding for equipment maintenance is what I would consider to be level services. Every year we have a little bit in that budget to make sure that as equipment ages, we have 3 large production kitchens, lots of interesting pieces of equipment there. And as that equipment ages, we want to be able to replace and repair it. I'm just peeking at my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, I guess I probably should say, I know we've said this at quite a few school board meetings, but the community just jumped in with both feet to help with the backpack program and with donations, school donations. It was actually amazing when I first came into the Wentworth kitchen after we shut down in March. I became sort of a courier and kept popping in and out of there to see what they were up to and pay their bills for them, which was kind of a good thing. And I found them building these beautiful boxes with meals and fun things, and maybe there's a cool little puzzle book in there that somebody might be interested in. And on the top, there's this little crowning glory, which was a roll of toilet paper. And in a time when everybody was treating rolls of toilet paper like gold, it was just like, oh, that is just the sweetest thing. So, all right, that's my little dramatic pitch about school nutrition.
And Peter is on the call, so if anyone has specific questions for him, he can also provide information.
Yeah, he said he'd be willing to jump in. We have one more slide for central office, and then we'll go to questions. And the central office slide tells us, again, we're using these framing questions, so I'm sort of jumping around, but what's in our budget in central office is funding for the superintendent transition, which just means salaries and benefits of an unknown level, as well as contracted services to support that process. Unemployment costs have been a little, I don't know what the word is, peculiar over the past 18 months. We started with enormous unemployment costs when a lot of people were being laid off. And as a direct reimbursement employer, we were receiving the bill for anybody who was collecting unemployment. Then an enormous amount of fraud started. And so we were getting double charged and booked for people that weren't really supposed to be on there. And we started getting credits when they figured that out. And at Department of Labor, they started to give us some of our money back. So it's been a roller coaster year, but we're thinking that with the pandemic economy, there's a chance that there will be some turnover. And so we want to be prepared for that a little bit more than we were in FY21. And the resources deferred or removed section in this budget proposal that the Leadership Council has put before you, we have a receptionist position We did have a central office receptionist position that was cut from the budget in the spring of 2020. That person was downsized, and then the position was removed in the FY21 budget. So for the past year, we've been sort of having a lot of pinch hitters in our central office staff. We have an amazing group of people up here who are willing to do whatever it takes to keep us open and running, and whether that's, whether sorting the mail is their job or not, they're sorting the mail, and whatever it takes, answering the phone. We've been lucky not to have a lot of foot traffic in central office because there just isn't foot traffic in general. But we have no one sitting out front right now, and we have no one manning the switchboard right now. It's just automated, and it's being forwarded to people's desks. And this has really proven to be quite a deficit for us. So that's included in our proposal. And now I will stop talking, and I know I saw Leanne's hand go up, so I'll reach out to her first.
I do have a question for Peter based on the COVID-19 bill that just passed today and the extension of the USDA Food for All Children program. Do we need to readjust in order to support that for July and August, or is it already part of the budget?
Basically, I found out this afternoon that had passed. So our summer programming, as far as daycare and community services, will be covered. But as far as that goes, it goes until September 30th. So I'm assuming that it's going to be further on than that, but at this point I can't tell for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And then, Peter, can you speak at all about, or maybe Kate, you might be able to help with this, about the deficit that this actually creates for us by having this federal lunch program offering the reimbursement?
Yeah, it is something that we talked about in finance. The fact that the feds have instructed us that we're allowed to provide free meals for all students. It means that we are not selling food, and therefore we don't have the opportunity to make money over and above the cost of the meals. And that was really the only way that we're able to support our labor costs, because our school workers are, they're entitled to wages and benefits under collective bargaining. And so it is going to be a bit of a problem for us, I think. What I'm looking forward to finding out, and I know this is the, should I say, $4 million question, is when we are able to get new stimulus money, which sounds like it's almost out the door. What does that look like? And would it be potentially possible to use some of those funds to restore lost revenue in school nutrition? Because the first rounds of CRF funds, you could not use them to restore lost revenue. And so that's something that I'm thinking about as we learn more in the next week. But Leanne has a good point. If we're not going to have revenue that we're expecting and budgeting for, then what is that going to look like?
Oh, you're on mute, Kate.
Just looking for hands raised. Anybody with questions for the segment, or anybody who forgot their question for the last segment? We'll see if people are hanging around. Oh, I see April and Sarah both.
So I have two questions. One's related to transportation, which is more just a confirmation, Kate, in terms of keeping the buses on the same renewal schedule. I sense that there might be a narrative that since the buses were not utilized, you know, do they really need to stay on that same schedule? And having had this conversation in the past, correct me if I'm wrong, please, that the replacement schedule has to do with being able to insure the buses and the age of the bus itself.
That's true. Yeah. For one thing, that a bus, once it hits 10 years of age, especially with the level of mileage that we have on those vehicles, even if the mileage was somewhat reduced this year, they're still very high mileage vehicles. So your cost of repairs begins to go up. But you're absolutely right. Any bus that's more than 10 years old is very difficult to insure. And in most cases, you cannot insure it for replacement value, which means that if you wreck a 10-year-old bus, you're going to get the Kelly Blue Book value of the bus, and you're not going to have $100,000 to go buy a new bus. So absolutely, good point.
Thank you for confirming that. And then my other question is about nutrition. Do we have any idea of the numbers in terms of how many students are currently accessing either picking up or eating in school every day?
I should be able to answer that immediately because I just did the state report last night, but I was kind of half asleep when I did the numbers. So Peter, Peter, you'll have a better guess, but we can provide that too and put it in the parking lot if we need to.
Yeah.
I actually had just sent that information to Diane.
Oh, there you go.
She has it in a text.
I shared it with the communications committee, so I know there are people here who have it.
After my last, yeah.
Yeah.
If you would have that, I don't have it off the top of my head.
I can get it. So we are serving an average of 12,500 lunches per month and 7,600 breakfasts each month. And then we get, you know, the reimbursement that we get for each of those breakfasts and lunches are more than it costs to make the lunch or breakfast, right? So like, I don't have that number in
right. So it's $4.15 per meal plus administrative costs and any other I guess they've added some extra costs that they've given us. So it ends up being about $4.37 per meal that we're getting, as opposed to the $2.63 meal that we would get normally.
And we are providing meals also to a couple of the daycares, I believe, in town, not just to our school students. So that's kind of a cool thing too.
Right.
Yeah, we've added about over 100 meals a month for daycares, which actually gives us the extra subsidy to help fund our program. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, now I've really messed up my screen, but oh well. Our next piece here is talking points and critical messages or takeaways or whatever label you want to put on the compilation of great ideas to share with our community. And I know that our finance committee and our communications committee for the board are both seriously intertwined and have already been having some great conversations about what the outreach piece is. I believe there's a document linked into the agenda at the end where people can put some notes. And we're at 6:22. 2 right now. So I don't know if you want to, April, have a little discussion around that, or if that's something we want people to do on their own. Because really the only other agenda item is just to review the upcoming steps, the next steps on the calendar.
Yeah, if we have 4 or 5 minutes to hear from either finance or communication in terms of big takeaways that they've already discussed, or if there's foundation for those conversations that's already been had, and that way, you know, we can also maybe get some input from people who don't serve on those 2 committees. So either Sarah or Leanne.
I'm deferring to Sarah first.
Well, you were off mute first, so why don't you go first?
Damn it. I know that Kristen has put together, or starting to put together some memes looking at the nursing, the things that we've been able to do with the CRF. Really want to push what we were able to accomplish with that money and how this is helping to keep us on task for maintaining what we have with this budget. And Kristen and Shannon, jump in where I'm going off a track. I know yesterday the one that got me was the books, and those numbers were incredible. And I think that that's important to highlight the readers that we're building. So that's some stuff that I'd like to push through.
Yeah, I'm sure we could find some data points. I did take pains to make sure that the CRF material was called out in the executive summary of the budget book, and Finance Committee gave me some great suggestions about how to tweak that a little bit to make sure that the community was seeing what they would expect to see or learning what they would expect to learn from us. But I think, you know, pulling those into sound bites is kind of a cool idea. You know, did you know kind of stuff like we had in our budget book last year.
And Kate, I'll just ask you to confirm an assumption that I have, then it'll lead me to just a call to action for the rest of the board. But as I compare what was presented here with the budget book, the assumption that I'm making is everything that was represented as, you know, a critical need is in the current proposal. Is that accurate?
Yes, the only things that are not presented as a done deal in all of the charts is those 5 positions, and we kind of went into that question in terms of class size, but there are no needs that have been absolutely called out by the leadership team that are not in the budget.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm saying that right.
No, well, I think you are. It makes sense to me. Does it make sense to others? I'm seeing on.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the very end of the executive summary, there's some bullet points there that are like, this budget includes, this budget restores. The budget does not include. So under the CRF funds that were in our operating budget, there's something that says, you know, we don't need extra money for a couple of things because we're all set.
Okay. So I just realized that I thought we had a finance committee meeting between now and first reading, which is next Thursday, but we don't. So we need to get something on the calendar because we need to make a decision on those additional staffing positions. And so I guess my call to action for anyone who's not on the finance committee, if you have opinions on it or questions, then I would, you know, invite you to share those with us between now and whenever our next finance committee meeting is, or obviously please feel free to join us at that meeting, and I'll reach out to you guys offline to get that scheduled.
Yeah, I have no idea how the 18th is next week already.
I know. Well, we also have, and I think, you know, this is something for consideration, April, depending on how the agenda for the 18th is panning out, we have the option of doing a special meeting on the 25th for just the budget if we need to, because we have a little bit of time before town council's first reading.
That's true. Yeah, when we were building the calendar, we don't have to have our budget in the hands of the council or the town manager technically until the 31st.
Right.
So we have that additional week if we wanted to push it out.
So if next Thursday is looking like a midnight ending, just for consideration.
And yesterday we had already talked about maybe having a workshop on the 18th to talk
Right.
about the enrollment. So we're kind of piling on a little bit.
Cool.
Great. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I will definitely make that part of the conversation when Sandy and I build the agenda. Nick, you have your hand raised too.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask really quickly about the, I'm just wondering for the 2 RN positions, which I know from my work on the school board, but also from my family life, that for a long time, there were traveling nurses in the primary schools and nurses circulated around. And it always kind of amazed me that we left schools without an RN on site. And now that we have the opportunity to kind of change that moving forward past COVID, I'm wondering if there's any way for folks in our community that may not understand the need to keep this after COVID, is there any kind of, I don't know, a testimonial statement or something that could come from the nurses about how important this is, what advantages there could be for keeping these positions in? Would that be helpful? I would love to see that stay, and I'm trying to think of any strategies I can think of to get that in people's minds.
That's a really good point, Nick. I think what's really powerful for me is I sound like a sales rep for the budget book, but it is free, so you can't accuse me of that. But the budget book from last year in the health services section, there's just this amazing litany of the incredible work that these folks do. And, you know, I think you're right. A lot of people in the community are like, well, a school nurse, that's the one who gave me the Band-Aid when I was in 2nd grade. These folks are healthcare professionals, top to bottom, even without COVID. So you're right, that needs to be sort of called out and shared with the community as best we can.
In some ways, it kind of reminds me of where we started tonight, which was talking about special education, because I remember touring the primary schools in my first few weeks as a school board member, and it amazed me just the amount of equipment and everything that's special. But I don't think that the public has any idea that that's what goes on at our schools, and I think nurses are right there. I think the general public doesn't understand the management of medication and of students that have special medical needs. I mean, there are some pretty extreme things that go way beyond Band-Aids, because that's my recollection of my school nurses when I was young too. But there's just so much more that goes into it now that needs that on-site full-time support.
I wonder if that might be something that communications could throw out a factoid or two. You know, did you know that X% of our kids visit the clinic every day because they have a medical need to do so, or, you know, something like that.
I can tell you that last year's analytics on the various memes that we put out, the nurses meme by far outperformed our other memes. So I do think that there is a sense that in this community, just how critical and important those positions are.
Can you believe how many times you're saying the word meme?
Kate, I'll turn it back to you to go over the budget calendar if there are no other questions or comments.
All right. So I've got one of these fancy transitions that I didn't know was built in here. It's very posh. This is just a quick overview of the next steps. We have our first reading listed here as March 18th. There's a budget calendar now, a full budget calendar posted up on the town school budget portal, which is on the town's website. We have calendars linked in all over the place in our documents as well. But if we stay true to our schedule, we'll be doing the first reading here on March 18th. We might push that out to the 25th, depending on how things go. And we just want to keep these dates in the sight of the public. So we'll continue to push them in places where folks can see them on the school calendar and wherever else we can think of. Anything you wanted to call out from that, April, of particular interest, or do you, I don't need to read through it, but, okay. So that's really where we're leaving it tonight, and we have a lot to do. Next up, Sarah's already said that she's going to be calling a finance committee meeting. We're going to rely on the finance committee to help us figure out what the proposal is that goes to the board for first reading. And then at that point, it becomes the board's budget, and we all surge off into the future and develop a lot of support and community understanding for our budget. There will be changes between first reading and second reading. We've talked about that a little bit, and we talk about it every year, that we'll know more before we get to second reading. So folks need to bear in mind that even our first reading is just that. It's the beginnings of the process, the public process. Any questions, wonders, excitement that we're ending more or less on time? I'm really impressed with you guys. You move well.
Well, with that, Kate, I'm not seeing any hands. On behalf of the school board, thank you so much to our central office leadership team for giving us the last 2 days of your time to make sure that the school board had this opportunity to go department by department to see what is in this year's budget, to get our questions asked. We all know that if something pops into our head an hour from now or 3 days from now, that not only is Sarah and the finance committee available to us, but that, you know, Kate and our other central office leaders are available to us to answer our questions. So thank you all so much for your time. And, you know, from me personally, thank you to the board for your time and attention to this. I know not everyone's forte is finance, but you all bring the same level of attention. And I appreciate, you know, the early morning yesterday and the late evening this, you know, or afternoon, evening today. So thank you all so much for doing this.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Oh,
I have a motion to.
Yeah, I have to have a motion to adjourn,
Oh.
please.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. And with that, Diane, please.
Ms. Giftis,
Yes.
Dr. Gill,
Yes.
Ms. Kazelonis,
Yes.
Ms. Layton,
Yes.
Mrs. Lindstrom,
Yes.
Mrs. Seither,
Yes.
and Mrs. Turner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.